My apologies. I didn't expect to introduce myself. I'm Kyla Irving. I'm the Communication and Marketing Manager at the United Way of California Capital Region. I am a longtime disability advocate since I was diagnosed with a chronic disease at 15 years old. And ever since I attended a youth leadership forum for students with disabilities, I've been an avid advocate, and I'm really excited to get this conversation rolling since I'm a person of color. I'm a Filipina immigrant, and I have always experienced life through the lens of being a person of color, an immigrant, and a person with a disability. So this is a conversation that I'm really excited to experience as well. So without further ado, I'm here to just make sure your tech is rolling well and that you're able to hear what you need to hear or see the interpreters that you need to see or the captions at the bottom. You can ask me questions directly if you don't want them to be broadcast to the rest of the chat. And I'm just here to support the room. So whatever you guys need, please let us know. Now you're muted.
Thank you so much. And so before we go ahead and get started, I want to start out by going through a bit of logistics. So first off, I just want to let everyone know that today's session is being recorded. So a heads up for anyone if they're going to call in and ask a question that way. We also have captions as well. You can turn the captions on and off at the bottom of your screen. There's an area that says CC and closed caption underneath that. We also have ASL interpreters. You can go ahead and pin them on your screen if that's something that you'll like to do. If you go ahead and hover above their panel, there should be 3 dots at the top, and that should allow you, or a pin button, and that should allow you to pin them to your screen. So we will be taking questions at the end of the panel. At any point, if you have a question throughout the panel, you can go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A chat, or you can go ahead and put in the chat box, and we will get back to them at the end and answer them there. During the Q&A portion, and this will be during the end, and I'll reiterate this, we'd like to reserve any spoken questions for those who are calling in or are otherwise unable to use the Q&A or chat box. So if you do need to use, if you are calling in and you would like to speak and ask your question, you can use dial 9 to go ahead and raise your hand, and then I'll be able to unmute you so you can ask your question. So yeah, this event is scheduled to run until 7:30 p.m. And we'll start with some opening remarks from our executive directors from Resources for Independent Living, as well as from United Way California Capital Region. And then we'll move into the panel, starting with panelist introductions, then jumping into the panel questions themselves. After that, there will be a little bit of time for Q&A, and at the very end, there will be a short event evaluation before you go, just so we can get some of your feedback. Again, I'm so grateful to have you all here with us today, and I'll go ahead and let April Wick, the Executive Director of Resources for Independent Living, go ahead and introduce herself.
Thank you, Kaelea, for that wonderful introduction. Well, hi, I'm April Wick, and I'm the Executive Director of Resources for Independent Living. We are the local disability justice organization that serves Sacramento and Yolo counties, and we are a consumer-driven, peer-based organization that is majority run and governed by people with disabilities ourselves. And I'm just really excited about this event, and I'll be putting my listening ears on, and I am so excited to be lending my support for this tonight. I want to give a special thank you to all of the panelists for giving your time this evening and for sharing your experiences. I also want to thank Kaelea Lucas for being a wonderful moderator, and for Kyla Irving for all of your beautiful work on the graphics and for being our behind the scenes person this evening. And also I would like to thank Stephanie Bray and the United Way California Capital Region for co-hosting this event with us and for fully supporting this concept. And as Brene Brown says, we're here to get it right, not to be right. And so I'm really looking forward to taking back everything that I learned tonight to make sure that our organization lifts up all voices of people with disabilities, because traditionally people with disabilities who were not white or male were not given the same respect in our movement that they should have been. And so I'm looking forward to amplifying the voices of our entire disability community. So thank you very much, everyone.
And hi, I'm Stephanie Bray. I'm President and CEO of United Way California Capital Region. And first, I want to welcome everyone and thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you, April, for reaching out and inviting us to be part of this important conversation. We at United Way believe in mobilizing and integrating resources in order to help communities. And most certainly during this time, our work is more relevant than ever. And so anytime we have an opportunity to really lift up the voices of those in our community that we work side by side to help, we like to take advantage of that. And so I just want to say thank you, April, for including me. She and I have kind of been comrades in arms on the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change, and we were the ones that were really lifting up the issue of equity as a framework for climate action and climate justice. And I learned an awful lot from her. I've enjoyed getting to know her both as a colleague and as a friend. And she's absolutely fearless, as I'm sure you all know. And so she's somebody I definitely like having on my team and on my side. I want to thank Kyla. I reached out to Kyla and said, hey, Kyla, we've had this opportunity offered to us. Can you help? And she absolutely stepped up and has done an incredible job on behalf of United Way. And she's only been with us for a short time, but she's really been pushing us in the direction of equity and inclusion and all of the ways that we communicate with our constituents, our stakeholders, and most certainly our community members. And it's been very powerful. And so I really appreciate her for that. And then thank you, Kaelea, for being the moderator, and of course, all of the panelists. I really look forward to hearing what you have to say about this issue. As Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality, teaches us, is that we are a combination of things, of issues. There are a lot of things that make us human. And when you have these intersections of race, of gender, and of disability, the structural issues show up, each and every one of them, and they combine to create powerful barriers that need to be broken down. And so I really look forward to hearing from you, how can we eliminate those barriers, and how can we carry forward equity, right, as people who are Black and are disabled? How do we attack that head on? And now more than ever is the time for us to do that. And so I thank you all. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, April and Stephanie. And again, thank you so much to all of my panelists who have agreed to step up and do this today. And we're gonna go ahead and move forward with the introductions so that you can get to know our panelists, hear a little bit about who they are, the type of work they've done. They're all very brilliant people. And we're going to start out with Dante. So you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good evening. Thanks, Kaelea. My name is Dante Allen. I am an individual who's born with a disability. I was born with spina bifida, and knew very early on in my life that I was never going to be able to make a living off the strength of my back alone. So education was very important to me. And so I went to college, graduated from UC Davis, go Aggies for any other Aggies out there. Also received my master's degree in communications from USC. So fight on Trojans if you're out there. But I really wanted to, Kyla actually approached me to be a part of this panel. And it was really exciting for me The work I do is related to people with disabilities. I am the executive director of a program called CalAble. If you're not familiar with it, it's a savings and investment program for people with disabilities, and it's designed to build some financial equity amongst the disability community. But really, this is the first work that I've ever done specifically with the disability community, and it really has sort of awakened a passion in me. I've been a self-advocate for my entire life, but now I feel I have an opportunity to be an advocate for those like me. So this is really an exciting opportunity for me. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dante. I really appreciate you. Next, introducing herself will be Shauntay Davis.
Good evening, everyone. I'm actually Shauntay Davis-Patterson. I'm recently married, but just haven't changed my name as of yet. So thank you for having me this evening. I am honored to be speaking tonight on this panel, and especially because my disability is a chronic illness. I actually have systemic lupus, and I've had it for about 22 years now. I was diagnosed when I was 19, and you know, I've been living with the issues that are associated with that since. I've been where I haven't been able to walk. Haven't been able to work. I've been on disability myself. So, so in terms of my my disability, that's my background there. I do work in public health. I have my master's in public health, and I'm currently the program director of California's Comprehensive Cancer Control Program under the California Department of Public Health. I've been there for about 12 years, but I've had a long career in public health, working in different issues, from HIV/AIDS to tobacco. I've lived and studied overseas in South Africa and Costa Rica. But the one thing that I love doing most out of everything is facilitating the Sacramento Lupus Support Group. And I've been doing that probably for about 12 or 13 years. Can't really tell you exactly how long because I can't remember. Time just escapes me these days. So I work and with a lot of lupus patients. It's an all volunteer support group, so it's not a formal organization, but we do partner with various lupus organizations nationally and statewide. And we do advocacy, go to the Capitol, et cetera. But having that connection and being able to support each other, I need support as well. Even though I've had this condition for 22 years. So anyway, that's sort of like the highlight of what I love doing in my life. So thank you for having me.
And thank you so much. And excuse me for the mix up with your last name. I really tried to remember that. But yes, thank you so much, Shauntay. Next, introducing themselves will be Eric.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Harris. I am, first of all, I'm an African-American male, dark-skinned, wearing a button-up shirt that's red, white, and blue today. And I was born with a physical disability. I was born with congenital hip dislocation. So it gave me nerve damage in my left hip, left ankle, left knee, left foot, and right ankle. I can still walk, but I happen to also be a wheelchair user. So I'm from Northern California, and I have been a disability advocate for a good portion of the early part of my career. I am currently a legislative advocate with Disability Rights California, which is the protection and advocacy organization for people with disabilities in the state of California. Before I was a legislative advocate at DRC, I was a legislative advocate at the NAACP for the state of California. as well as a member of the local NAACP and a local officer of the local NAACP. So I grew up in a family of advocates and educators. I have always been passionate about education and about advocacy. I attended high school here in Sacramento. I attended Christian Brothers High School in Sacramento, and then while playing wheelchair sports, adaptive sports, including wheelchair basketball, I earned a scholarship to play wheelchair basketball and go to school at the University of Arizona. I traveled throughout the country and throughout the world playing wheelchair basketball, a sport that I'm still very passionate about. And while playing that sport, I met people with disabilities throughout the country. And at first, they were mostly people with lower limb disabilities, spinal cord injuries, amputations, spina bifida, arthrogryposis, and other disabilities that impact lower limbs. But I had opportunities to advocate and meet other people with different disabilities at the American Association for People with Disabilities in Washington, D.C. While I was there, I was able to intern for an organization and meet people in Washington, D.C. involved in politics and government. So that's a large portion of where the early part of my career has been, involving law and policy. I attended the University of Oregon School of Law, where I graduated in 2014. So a lot of my career has been in those spaces and in advocacy, in policy, and in law. And I've focused on advocating for Black people and for people with disabilities primarily. And I'm excited to be on this panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. And last but certainly not least, we'll have Raelyn Keys introduce herself.
Save the last and the youngest for the last person I see. So, hi everybody, I'm Raelyn Keys. I'm not as accomplished as everybody else on this panel because, I mean, I am one of the youngest, I do believe, but I got my start young. I was a child in Sacramento education system with an IEP with a learning disability. And from there, I learned the importance of having an IEP, specifically the importance of being able to have one and get the help that you need. And from there, I went on to high schools, and then I went on to Sac City and then the Sac State, and now I'm at University of San Francisco. With my work experience, like I said, I'm not as dedicated, as decorated as everybody else on this panel, but I first got my start in the disability community by working in direct service support. And with that, I was working with people with different types of disabilities, making sure that they were able to stay independent and not have to rely so much on government or their families, where they were able to advocate for themselves. And then after that, I went into working for a community-based organization. That's where I got to meet the lovely Kyla, who, along with April, got me to do this. And as I was working within this community-based organization, I was working with the youth, and what came across a lot was secondary disabilities, or the main disability being mental health. And working with the youth and learning that mental health is not really talked about, specifically is not really talked about within minority groups, made it really important, and it became a big focus of mine to make sure that I got out there, learned as much as I could, make a lot of my focus about bringing the education so that we're out here getting the help that we need, because this talk is about what's going on in our Black lives, and a lot of the lives that are being affected by police brutality and the government is people with mental disabilities. And so that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Raelyn. And do not downplay everything that you've done. You are amazing. Everyone can see all of the panelists that are here tonight are very amazing and accomplished individuals. So I really encourage everyone to open their ears tonight and really just listen to what they have to say. This is by no means the full conversation regarding this topic, but it is a start. This is a place to start getting you thinking. This is a place for you to take a chance to just sit back and listen and hear people who have firsthand experience within this community and see what you can do to support and what you can do to help and what you can do to be an ally. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the questions. So there's going to start with some individual questions with everyone and move into some other questions later. And so this first question is for Shauntay Davis-Patterson. Does being Black create an additional barriers when accessing resources available to those with disabilities?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. Being Black actually creates additional barriers to a lot of things for Black folks, as we'll probably hear throughout hearing all the questions there. I'll speak from my experience just with those who I work with in my lupus support group and all of the different organizations that support us through the lupus networks nationally and statewide, as well as just experience with family as well, because I'm Black. I'm have Black family members, married to a Black man. I have Black sons. So I'll speak from those perspectives. And then also, because I do work in public health, draw from a lot of my experience there too. And I would, and just in regards to accessing resources, again, you know, this is a question that really, the answer kind of can align with a lot of the topics that we'll talk about. But when I think about what those barriers are, I think about mistrust, medical mistrust that a lot of Black folks have with the healthcare system. I think about perceived discrimination that a lot of Black folks experience. Also, knowing that wherever they may be seeking resources, may not come from a source that they're familiar with. So even outside of mistrust. And, you know, just even thinking about myself and when I was first diagnosed with this disease, not knowing what it was, not knowing where to go. You don't, and a lot of people who have come to the support group have told me that you just don't automatically think, let me find out where I can find this information and where I can go. And it's surprising that a lot of folks that that come to my lupus support group are not Black, even though lupus does affect more minorities and more Black folks than any other race. I think, I wanna say the stats are around 40% or so. But it's surprising that I don't have those numbers in my support group. It's mostly white women that I have, even though, again, lupus affects mostly minorities. And so when asking, you know, the Black folks that I have on my support group and just that have come to me throughout the years, how did you get my information? Because people do come to me for a lot of resources. They just say, I didn't know that things were out there. I wasn't, you know, attuned to the fact that I can go out and access these resources. And, you know, and again, I think that the mistrust is there. They don't know who's running the support group. Is it someone that looks like them? I have had people tell me that they were excited when they found out that it was a Black woman that is facilitating the support group, those Black folks that I have talked to. So again, you know, just going back to that mistrust, not knowing or trusting where that information would come from, not knowing where it's going to come from. Also not knowing if the person that you're going to for these resources, if they don't look like you and haven't had your experience, are they going to be able to share with you and you learn from them, you know, that type of thing. So those are the types of things that I hear for accessing those resources.
Thank you. And not to put you on the spot, but just so that we can understand a little bit more, what do you think are some sort of solutions or some sort of ways that we can address this issue?
Yeah, I think just being more visible in the community. We do try to attend community events when we can. It is an all volunteer group, so it gets hard to do that. And then because a lot of us have lupus, it's hard to kind of, you know, make schedules sometimes, because with lupus, you can be fine one day and then the next day you're out. So, and not just for lupus, for all chronic, you know, diseases in general. I think we just need more awareness out there in the community that there are those resources and support out there. And we also need those folks who are going out to look like us. Because again, as I mentioned, with my support group, I have a lot of white women. And when we have events like Black Expo, we'll go to Black Expo when, you know, when Black Expo comes. There was a Black women's health event that happens every year. And, you know, I have to do a lot of those, and I do as much as I can because the other volunteers that I have are white women. And I know that when I go to these events and talk to Black people who look like me, they're happy that they do have someone that looks like them. So again, just that awareness and making sure that we have those representatives in the community so people are comfortable and they know that they can talk to someone who looks like them.
Thank you so much. The next question will be for Eric Harris. What challenges does COVID-19 specifically, and this time right now, present to Black students who are in special education?
Thank you. So let me kind of give a little bit of background on special education for African American students, specifically in Sacramento. DRC, Disability Resource, disability organizations throughout the state of California, as well as in Sacramento, the Black Parallel School Board filed a lawsuit against Sacramento City Unified School District earlier this year because of discrimination against African American students with disabilities. They were being segregated. They were being placed in parts of schools and even in other schools that were not inclusive. And it was a really big problem. A lot of the allegations in the lawsuit included not preparing Black students with disabilities for graduation, not preparing Black students with disabilities for the next steps in their lives. So Disability Rights California and other resources and other groups filed this lawsuit and basically put Sacramento City Unified School District on notice that this was not all right. That happens often, especially to African American families and to African American students. Not to mention, as we're all aware, very often African American students are not diagnosed properly with learning disabilities and other forms of disabilities that can impact them while they're in schools. So that just to kind of give you a little bit of background just for the city of Sacramento and public schools here in Sacramento. As far as COVID and Black students with disabilities who are in special education, some of the problems that we are seeing are including, distance learning. Distance learning is something that is challenging for all students. It is especially challenging for students with disabilities and students who might not have access to high quality internet, might not have parents who are available all the time to assist their children in their education while they're also working. So these are challenges that Black students with disabilities face all the time. Some of the other concerns that we're also seeing and that we're also trying to prepare families for include the fact that when students do go back to schools, whenever that might be, some students are even going back relatively soon, that socially distancing and wearing masks might be challenging enough for all students, especially young students, understanding why they have to socially distance, understanding why they have to wear masks and stay, stay away from other students. That can be challenging on its own, but it can be especially challenging for students with disabilities. Some students with disabilities might not feel comfortable wearing masks. It might impact their health. So there are a lot of challenges that a lot of organizations in Sacramento and in the state of California are trying to prepare for. And it's important that parents are aware of these potential challenges and that they do what they can to communicate with their schools, with their districts, and make sure that their students are in the best circumstances moving forward and in the best circumstances to be successful when they go back to school, even during a pandemic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. Moving on, we have a question for Raelyn Keys. The question is, how is mental health treated for Black people by the Black community and from U.S. society as a whole?
So the short answer is it's not, and it is. It's a simple, complex answer, and I'm hopefully from what I talk about, you guys will understand why I answered it this way. So just like Eric did, I'm gonna give a little bit of background. So mental health has become a really hot topic now, but it's not in the way that we think. It's not about providing services. It's not about trying to understand. It's normally always brought up when it's scapegoating. And that's during when there's a criminal activity, something horrible, somebody died, and normally it has to do with white males, cis males. That's when it's when you mostly hear that they want to talk about mental health, right? But we know that there's way more to that. But recently, so there is a little bit of a positive in that, but recently a lot of employers have started offering counseling through employment through their insurance. So with this little bit of history, and any of you guys who are mathematicians, you let me know, and you let me know if you think these numbers add up. According to the census, Black people make up 13.4% of Americans, all right? 16% of those have reported that they have a health disability, a mental health disability. So that equals about 7 million people. I did not do that math, but that was according to the new census of 2018. So mental health is affecting Black people at a higher rate than it is affecting white people. And it's not saying that people who are non-Black are not being affected. They are still being affected as well. But historically, they're not experiencing the amount of trauma that people of color are. And that trauma is stuff like violence, oppression, being dehumanized, systematic and systemic racism constantly leading up to their mistrust of the government and the systems that they're in. So with that, there's the answer of how the society is helping mental health or how it's treating mental health is they're criminalizing Black people. I'm just gonna say it like that. They're criminalizing Black people. When you're born and you are Black, you are already seen as a criminal. For example, you can be a Black child and let's say you're a little bit taller than the average white child. You're already stamped as aggressive. So they've already marked you as a problem. So now you're not getting the attention from your school teachers, you're not getting the attention from state, all because you're a bigger proportion in the color of your skin. So that adds a complex. Then let's throw in things like economic status. That also leads to a problem. So quite a bit of people in the Black community have mental health disparities, and most of it stems from racism. Because of racism, Black people constantly live in a fight or flight mode. And fight or flight means it's our normal response. So it means that most time if we're doing something, it's either we're gonna leave, we're gonna run, specifically if it's something that scares us, or we're gonna freeze. And that's a new one for a lot of people, that we tend to freeze up, or we're gonna fight. And this is where normally we get labeled as a criminal, because most of the time we fight, because we've been dealing with this our entire life. So within constantly being in fight or flight, we develop toxic stress. And with toxic stress, I want to make sure I break this all the way down. There's three forms of stressors. There's positive stress, that's brief, you have support, it's normally real quick, you don't think about it tomorrow. You got tolerable, it's serious, but you normally have support, and it's also temporary. And then you have toxic. This is prolonged. This is a prolonged action of the stress response. Excuse me. Yeah, it's a prolonged action of the stress response. And that comes from constantly being in adverse situations. And adverse situations meaning criminalization, police brutality, economic status. So that means stuff from like redlining. That means from, like, I was a child who had an IEP. Let's say your parent can't get you to school to meet that percentile for you to be able to go to school, to be able to qualify for an IEP. Stuff like that constantly puts more stressors within the Black community. And with those stressors, they're an everyday thing. So we start to develop mental health issues. And with the mental health issues, most of them tend to be, and these are the most common within the Black community, is post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse disorder, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, dissociation identity disorder, and bipolar. So with that, and this is all still basically how society is responding to mental health within the Black community. With that, and I want to step back onto schizophrenia and why the number, and why I even put that in there. It's common because most Black people, when they're diagnosed, they're mostly diagnosed with schizophrenia, less likely to be diagnosed with a mood disorder compared to white people. In addition, they want to medicate us. They want to give us more medication, less therapy to suppress us, to make us obedient. And I'm not saying that's everybody. Some people really do absolutely need the help, but schizophrenia is a combination of genetics and facing adversity. And with prolonged adversity, and a lot of people, this is not actually a new study, but this is a study that is showing that adversity and prolonged adversity tends to start to change the DNA. And with that, different things sets the mind into fight or flight. It becomes a normal response to always be in a high toxic stress. So you never learn how to come down. So with that, the way the Black community is starting to respond, historically we have ignored it. We typically have ignored we typically have ignored mental health disparities and our mental health period because of the fact that that's just one more thing for people to have on us. And I know this is a mixed talk and I do not ever want to trigger anybody, but I'm hoping that from what I'm telling you, you learn to look at us with a lens of empathy, and you learn to try and put yourselves in our shoes and understand that we are constantly told to be a certain way, to walk a certain way, and to feel a certain way. So when we have a disability that is non-apparent, so this is a disability that you cannot see, we're not taken serious and we're typically labeled as crazy. Now, we make a constant joke of, it's our coping mechanism, we make a constant joke about our mental health states. And like I said, historically, we have ignored it. But that has prolonged us getting the help and has prolonged us being able to cope with it as a community. I do have notes because I want to make sure I hit everything for you guys just within this small span. So being Black, living in the intersection of racism, classism, health inequalities, all of our mental health is exacerbated and unfulfilled. Then you throw on top of government. Then you throw on top of criminal injustices. That's when we find out that most people that are serving in the jail system are mostly people who've had a mental health disability. So lately, our cultural response in addressing the disparities of our well-being in the Black community, and it's slowly starting to become a norm, because I have to give it up to my generation, the millennials, and the generation up under us. We started making sure we're breaking that cycle of not addressing our needs. We have talked about it, we've thrown it in your guys' faces, and I say your guys as in the society, we've thrown it in the faces that we need help. We started creating and talking in groups. So with that, we started slightly breaking the stigma, but there's always something. With breaking the stigma, it's still not enough. Right now, Black women are the highest and most educated people in America, but it's not enough. There are many, many Black doctors and many, many Black police officers and many, many people trying to go into all these professions to help their own community, but it's still not enough. So even with that progress, it's not enough. And that's because society still, and the government still wants to keep their foot on our necks. They want to make sure that we constantly keep starving. We're starving. We're starving for this help. So if the community doesn't know about lost my train of thought. If the community does not know about resources, or even offer resources, or even have resources, then they stay at the bottom. And that's not to say that the entire community, the Black community, has stayed at the bottom. A lot of the Black community has moved into affluency, but it's still not enough, because every single day they walk out their door, there's no guarantee that they're coming back alive. There's no guarantee that they're not getting stopped. There's no guarantee that somebody's not going to say something racist to them. And there's no guarantee that somebody in their office is not probably going to have a microaggression against them. So with that, I just want to give you a little bit of numbers. Less than 2% of the American Psychology Association members are Black. That's pretty much nothing. That's nobody. So if there's nobody in there to represent us, why would we go and seek help? That's the problem. And Black people have a history with the medical society and the medical community of being mistreated, not coming out alive, our children dying, our mothers dying, from simple things of going in because you pricked your finger on a rose that had a fungus. And that's a problem. But as we see that there's only 2% that's in the psychology field, I have a question, and hopefully Kyla can have people answer this in the chat for me, is do you know where 40 to 50% of our representation is? And that's my question. Kyla, would you mind having people answer in the chat for me? So do you know where most of our representation is? Where is the Black community at? If we're not in the police forces, if we're not in the hospitals, if we're not doing other labors, where are we at?
We have a person said, Jocelyn said the entertainment industry. Dante says we are in prison. Someone else said jail. more people saying being oppressed, prison, generational curse.
Correct. We're in jail. We're in prisons. We make up 50% of the jail population. That doesn't make sense. How is it that we're 13.4% of the entire Americas, United States, not the Americas, United States, but most of our people of color and disproportionately Black people are within the jail systems? See, it's the problem. So some more little lovely statistics. You know, we all love numbers. That means that Black men are 6 times or more likely to be represented in the jails and prison than white men. Women are 50% more likely to be in jail than white women. So they had a number about 37 white women being in prisons and jails, and for Black women, it was doubled. And then they found out through a survey and actually going through a lot of these jailhouses that Black people with mental health conditions, specifically those with psychosis, are more likely to be in jail or in prison. But the interesting thing is, as of 2019, we're not even making it to those jails or prisons. We're not even making it to the police car. And that's equally men and women. So with that, we're also talking about mental health. There has been a lot of studies by Black people, and it's trying to figure out why is mental health affecting us, and then why is it normally substance abuse that tends to go hand in hand with what's going on in our lives. And the debate is which one's coming first. Is it our substance use to be able to walk outside and feel normal for 2 seconds? Or is it our mental health, so why we are using substances to feel normal for 2 seconds?
Mm-hmm.
So with that, there's also disparities of access to care. There's nobody to treat Black people. And with that, that means that over time, our mental health still and is gradually getting higher. Even if we are now starting to acknowledge it, there's still not enough people that we trust to help us. And then lastly, as I said, millennials and the Gen Zers have done a big jump in making sure that mental health is starting to be recognized. But they're coming from generations of people who didn't know, who never learned that it was okay, and it's not their fault. Thank you.
Yeah, that's such an important part of the conversation. Mental health is such an, I think, invisible and overlooked disability that oftentimes, like in cases of police brutality and other things, like it can actually be deadly. So having this conversation and having this recognition is so important. So thank you so much for that, Raelyn. We're gonna give Dante a chance to answer his question as well. And the question is, given your perspective being both Black and disabled, what similarities / differences do you see and experience in your advocacy?
Thank you for that. And the first thing that I should say is that Raelyn deserves her own panel, because as young and as non-accomplished as she claimed to be, she has a wealth of knowledge to share. So hopefully we can come back together and hear more from her.
Wasn't downplaying myself. Just was trying to get some kudos in there. Got some people to call. Give us some ego strokes.
I get it. I get it. The first thing that I'll say is that we tend to think from a diversity standpoint that it's an addition, right? Like you're disabled +1, you're African American, or you're a woman +1, you have a disability. And really, I would argue that it's not just a simple addition; it's an exponential explosion. Because it's like there are assumptions made about me on a daily basis based on the color of my skin, and then there are additional assumptions that are made about me because I use a wheelchair. or for example, you know, I've often been, I said I went to UC Davis and to USC for my education, and I've been that individual, the only Black person in a lecture hall of say 500 people, and I was the only one. In addition, I was the only person with a disability. So I have perspectives that are typically different than the average perspective. And my background, the work that I was doing before I came to the Office of Health Equity, before I was in Cal Label, I was with the Department of Public Health in the Office of Health Equity. And so I understand on a very basic level that yes, there is systemic racism. So we can end that debate today of does it exist or not. So anybody who doesn't believe that it does, you've been misinformed or underinformed, because we can look across an entire diaspora of conditions, life expectancy, outcomes on life, and determine that yes, if you are a person of color, you can't out-educate yourself, you can't out-earn your color in order to achieve equity with the majority of the population. And so I like to say that I bring my entire self to my job every day. And one of my colleagues is joined us tonight, and she knows that this very morning, when I was speaking to my staff, I had to address the fact that my heart is heavy today. And it is because I grow weary of being sort of in this pandemic environment, just like everyone else, but I'm even wearier of the fact that I see so many people that look like me that are dying at the hands of the people who are sworn to protect them. And so in that circumstance, I cannot turn off my Blackness just because I show up at work in the morning. And so many days we attempt to do that. And I won't speak for everyone, but I'll say I myself, I attempt to turn off the things that make me who I am in order to make the people around me feel more comfortable. And today was one of those days where I just could not do that. And to a larger degree, I think I turn off the fact that I have a disability. And as a matter of fact, I am one of those people who will say I was a closeted man with a disability my entire life. And it's hard to do that because yes, I have, when I walked with a pronounced limp. And now that I no longer walk, I'm in a wheelchair full time. It's not an invisible disability by any means. As soon as you see me, you know that I have a disability. But I had that mindset of if you never brought it up, I never would either. And the reason being is because of that exponential growth. I was educated, I had very good parents that really sort of instructed me that in order to get half as far in life, oftentimes you will need to be twice as good as other people. And so anything that is perceived as a weakness, I try to avoid those things at all costs. I don't ever want you to know if I am ignorant about something. I don't ever want you to know that I cannot achieve something, even if physically it's very difficult for me. My objective, my mode, the thing that motivates me is to rise to another level, to do more than you think that I am possibly capable of, because there are many times that I am underestimated or marginalized. And here's where I'll get a little bit controversial, is that it often comes at the hands of my own people, right? So when we look in environments, and I've actually been very encouraged. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and throughout this, with the killing of George Floyd, it really has awakened the activist in her. And so she came to me and asked if in the middle of a pandemic, could she go to a protest? And I was like, the only way you're going to a protest is if I go with you. And so we went together. And the thing that has been really enriching about these protests that we've attended together is that they are very conscious of inclusion for everyone. So much so that they talk about, if there's a march, that the people who may need the most help to actually make that march stay in the center of the group, to make sure that there are people in front of them and behind them to provide the extra attention or care if needed. But I can say that that is not always the case, right? As a person with a disability, especially, when people don't understand what you can do or what you can't do, there have often been times where I'm expected not to have a fully thought out argument towards something, that I can't be animated or forceful about these things, that because I'm not quote unquote prepared to fight for whatever my thoughts are, then perhaps I shouldn't be able to have those things. But I am a person that has studied my whole life how to articulate myself. And so I have very strong opinions, and I will forcefully share those with you. And it's never a matter of coming to a physical fight for me, but it is, I will very articulately tell you how I believe that you may be misinformed about a particular subject. But all of those things sort of come together to form a mesh of peril that create the kind of circumstances that Raelyn was talking about. The level of anxiety that comes from being a person that is in a world that very seldomly resembles me. But it's something that the older I get, and there are some benefits, Raelyn, to aging, is that I've gotten a new perspective. And so my perspective now has shifted to all of the things that I have learned on my own or was taught to advocate for myself. I have a wealth of knowledge to share, not only to the people who are around me, but to the people who are like me, who are experiencing some of the things that I faced earlier in life. I really feel like there is a great benefit to being that kind of advocate, to showing up and sharing what I'm thinking and feeling to others who may never get or gain the perspective that I did because of the things that I've experienced in my life. And so going back to what the question was, there are similarities. There is marginalization that happens. There is underestimation that happens quite a bit, but there are also differences. The very way that that most Black men are seen as threatening or unaggressive, I can often be seen as passive or unsure of myself, and those are things that are very innate to people. And I've worked in organizations that were either for and about people with disabilities, and I faced disability discrimination in those roles. I've worked in organizations that were about inequities based on socioeconomic status or race, and I faced discrimination in those same organizations. And so what it's taught me to do, number one, is to try not to be embarrassed or ashamed about those things that make me different, but use them as opportunities to educate others, to bring them to sort of widen that tent. And so I have to say that I am really disheartened, and this is not meant to be a political discussion for me, but I watched the Democratic National Convention last week. I watched the Republican National Convention this week. And the big difference is that in this week, a Black man was shot in the back 7 times. And when the folks at the convention this week talked about it, they talk about law and order. They talk about of being safe. And in these circumstances, who are the people that are really unsafe? You have to ask that question, and it's disappointing to me. The same thing with the coronavirus. We very quickly moved from not fully understanding what this virus was all about to decisions, folks wanting to make decisions about who we could vote off the island. We said old people can be voted off the island and sick people could be voted off the island. It was very quickly that we reached or that the majority was reaching these decisions. And the problem is, as I look at it, I could fit in several of those categories, right? I am a person with a disability, which means by nature, I have a pre-existing condition. And for you not to show empathy or concern or a sense of community around that is incredibly disheartening to me. And so I think that these kinds of conversations are very important. Again, I'm very happy to be here. Look forward to more questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dante. And so we are getting down to like the last 20 minutes of our event. So I do want to leave time at the end for everyone to ask questions. But before we get into that, I do have just a very important question, and this is for all of the panelists. And one of the main points that we're here. So to everyone, I want just a brief answer from you. I know that this could be a whole huge panel on its own, but how do we, as people who are outside of this intersection, become better allies? How do we better show out for you all? You can answer in any order that you prefer, but just give us an idea, like what is it what actions can we take? Like what can we do?
I have an answer off the top of my head, so if folks don't matter if I go first. I just finished reading Robin DeAngelis's book on white fragility. And it talked about the circumstance of when young people, when children are very young, they are naturally inquisitive. They ask questions. You see a man in a wheelchair and you say, "Mommy, why is that man in a wheelchair?" And as adults, when we perceive that it's something negative, we want to shut that down. We tell them it's not appropriate to ask that question. So children learn at a very early age that the reason why that person is, that the fact that that person is different is bad. And so they lose the language to talk about it. The same thing happens with race. If someone, if a child never saw a Black person before and they say, "Mommy, why is that man's skin black?" You know, mom wants to shut that down. Doesn't happen if a man is a bodybuilder, if he's nice and buff, they say, "Mommy, why is his body shaped like that?" They'll say, "Oh, because he works out and he focuses on," because they see that, perceive it, you know, even subconsciously as a positive. And so the first thing that we can do is we can work very, very hard to stop putting this into the DNA of the generations that follow us. We can say I've never had a problem when people come up to me and ask me, hey, how did you get into a wheelchair? Why do you use that wheelchair to get around? Those kinds of things. I've never had a problem with that. And I can tell you all about me. But if you make assumptions about me, and especially assumptions about what I am capable of or incapable of, then we tend to have some difficulties communicating with one another. So I would say that's the very first step.
Thank you. And anyone can go next when they're comfortable.
So it's like mild in manner, whereas like you have someone
I'll
who
go.
desires to do that.
So the question was, how can we all become better allies? Kaelea?
Yes. How can we become better allies to you?
Yeah, well, I learned this from a professor. She's very active within the Black Lives Matter movement, and her name is slipping my mind as of right now, but I also want to keep this short. The best way to become a better ally to me and to Black Lives Matter is grow from being an ally to being an accomplice. Be an accomplice, be willing to understand the ramifications of what you are saying, and you're saying that you're standing in solidarity with. Make sure you fully understand that, and make sure that you're willing to stand on the front lines with all these other organizations and all the Black people that are out here and fight for this entire change, because like I had said before, the disability community and the Black community have been on the front lines with each other for a very long time.
Thank you so much.
And I wouldn't have anything else to add, because I totally agree with, with Dante and Raelyn in terms of that understanding. That understanding has to be there, because it's one thing to go in the streets and stand next to someone and have a sign, but what else are you doing? And do you truly understand, what you're marching for and why, and what's the next steps? So having that understanding, having that concrete, that base, and then taking it a step further, and not just standing there shouting something one day, but are you going to go to your lawmaker now to help make a change? What are you going to do? So, yeah, I agree with Dante and Raelyn there.
Yeah, and I, to agree with what the previous speakers have said, I would also like to add a couple of simple things first. First is just listening. A lot of times, Black people and people with disabilities do not feel that we are heard. So taking some time to listen to what our positions might be, what our feelings might be about certain circumstances. I know that some of us who are on this panel are very comfortable with our disability or with our chronic illness, but there's an understanding too that there are a lot of people with disabilities who might not be as comfortable. A lot of people with disabilities who might have different experiences growing up, have different experiences with their disability, with their individuality. They might not feel comfortable speaking about their disability or about what they're going through. So just understanding that everybody is at different levels when it comes to their level of disability pride, their level even sometimes of Black pride. And so I think that that's an important element. And also all organizations, especially civil rights organizations, but also corporations, businesses, et cetera, should always consider reaching out and lifting up the voices of people who are Black and disabled. I think it matters for having representation, of course, but also the perspectives that people who are Black and have disabilities bring to organizations and bring to businesses can be unique and will ultimately benefit the entire organization and the entire movement, so to speak. So I think that oftentimes civil rights organizations, criminal justice organizations that are fighting for this human rights and civil rights for all people should just take a moment to pause sometimes, and to lift up in the best ways that they can other voices, voices of people with disabilities and others, so that their perspectives can be brought to the table.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This has just been such a great and amazing conversation. I do see a couple questions, and if anyone else has a question, you can go ahead and feel free to put that into the question and answer box or the chat box. And if you are calling by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and we can chat that way. Before we go ahead and get into that Q&A, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link for the survey, just so that everyone has time to click on it before it ends. So I'm going to enter that into the chat. You can take a chance to look over that. And I'm going to go ahead and start with a first question that I actually received by email. So this is the first one I saw, so I'll ask this. And anyone who's on the panel, anyone who wants to answer this, you can go ahead. And the question is from Jocelyn Mapp. The question is, how do we break misconceptions about disability within the Black community? And anyone can take that.
I can get us at least started with that one. So I think that part of this is that it needs to be a two-way street, so to speak. I think that as much as we discussed earlier, it's important for allies to reach out to people who are Black and have disabilities. It's also important that those of us who do have a voice, those of us who are in positions of influence, those of us who are comfortable with our disabilities and our racial background, ethnic backgrounds, that we reach out and that we connect to organizations, to leaders. I know, all of us are in the greater Sacramento area. We should all be in communication with one another. We should all be in communication with city council members here in Sacramento, county board of supervisors. The mayor should know who we are. I used to work as a staff member for members of Congress. I used to work as a staff member for Councilman Alan Warren, who represents North Sacramento and Del Paso Heights. And it's important that he and others hear from our community and that they understand the importance of the intersection of race and disability and how that can impact certain policies that they have, how it impacts daily life. So I think that part of it, of course, is them reaching out and connecting to us. But another big part is us doing our part and doing what we can, especially the leaders in our community, to make sure that we connect to policymakers, community leaders, activists, and others to really get information out there and get the correct information, get the information from our voices and from our perspectives, so that it's not watered down, it's not fluffed in any way, but it's really from our mouths, and they get to hear it and hear from our perspectives. So I think that that's a good way for us to at least get started in the greater Sacramento area, and that should expand beyond Sacramento to Northern California, to the state of California, and beyond.
I agree with everything that Eric said. The one thing that I'll say, and this is really more for a matter of perspective, is if we could encourage the Black community to look at Black people with disabilities in the similar vein, and hear me out before you react to this, but in a similar vein that I've often heard that people who are of mixed race feel as if they don't belong in particular in any category, whether it's if you're Black and white, are you at home with Black people or white people? And sometimes they say they never truly feel like they're at home. And I would say that as a Black person with a disability, there have often been times where I will react to something from the perspective of a person with a disability. And I'll hear Black people say, well, why do you limit yourself by looking at it from that perspective? And it's like, that's actually not limiting. It's opening an entirely sort of new door that you would never look at this from that perspective because you don't have that perspective, or vice versa. When you're around a group of people, and the reality is other communities know how to gather very well, especially in disability communities. So you'll see when I played wheelchair basketball, and Eric, I had no offense. I was only defense, just so you know. But when I played wheelchair basketball, every person that I played with was white. And it led me to sort of not believe that there were other Black men with disabilities out there. And it actually took me going to an abilities expo in Southern California before I saw a Black man that was well-dressed. He had a designer bag hanging off the back of his wheelchair. And I was like, my people. So, so I think that if the Black community can understand that there are not a lot of places that we can feel at home, that perhaps they can approach it from a perspective that is more welcoming. And the other thing that needs to happen, and we need to be vocal, and it's not just people with disabilities, but our allies as well, is that we can never allow a situation that is not inclusive. I've been at speaking events in my own organization when they knew that I was a speaker, and yet they didn't make any accommodations to be able to get me up on the stage where folks were giving their speeches. I've worked in a hospital that only deals, well, not only, but they specifically deal with people in wheelchairs, and they built sections to save money that were not wheelchair accessible. And I said, when you do that, you are making the determination that nobody with a wheelchair will ever be in this section. You're making those decisions as quickly as possible. So we have to be vocal at every turn. So whether it's this kind of Zoom call, and I apologize because I didn't describe myself. So if there are visually impaired folks out there, I'm a Black man of middle complexion and with a bald head. So you know what I am and how I present. But we need to make sure that these things are inclusive. So I love the captioning. I love the fact that we have signers that are present to make this type of event. And it shouldn't be exclusive to events that are for people with disabilities. It should be for every event. These things are universal and helpful. My daughter watches TV constantly with the closed captions on because she just likes it like that. She doesn't have any kind of hearing issue, but she just likes to watch TV that way. So it helps her. And I don't knock her for that because I do lots of things that help me. And so we should make sure that those things are included for everyone, not just in these settings.
Thank you so much, Dante. If anyone else has any final questions, you can go ahead and put those into the Q&A or the chat box. This one looks like it was answered, and it's a pretty short question, but Carrie England says that the word accomplice seems like criminal, and that they're uncomfortable with the word and they're not sure why. So just if anyone has any ideas for the word accomplice, I don't know if Raelyn, you want to take that briefly, but yeah.
So the word accomplice, some people will be uncomfortable with the word. There's a lot of words we're uncomfortable with. If the label doesn't work for you, find a label that does, but just be, okay, cohort, there we go, comrade. Any of those that will work, but they're slightly more than an ally. Because like I said earlier, an ally will say that they're standing there with you in solidarity, but they may not always be there like an accomplice will. An accomplice will be there, the accomplice will be in front of you. Thank you.
Thank Thank you so much. The way that I thought about it too is I feel like historically, a lot of times certain identities are criminalized. So if it sounds criminal, like maybe it should be. Like sometimes like when people are at protests, it's like looked at in a negative light. But if you are going to be there, you are going to be an accomplice in that thing that is viewed, you know, in a negative light, because you are still going to be here for this community, irregardless. So I thought that was a beautiful word. I just wanted to speak out about that in a little bit. And we are coming to the end. I'm going to go ahead and again, just put the monkey survey in the chat again, just in case anyone didn't have a chance to answer it or if it got lost in there. And finally, I just want to thank you all so much for coming out and joining this panel. Again, this is in no way the full discussion, but it was such an amazing discussion. I have a lot to think about. I have a lot that after this meeting, this webinar, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna just sit and think about it because this was such an amazing discussion. I want to thank April Wick and Stephanie Bray for getting together and, you know, conceptualizing this webinar. I want to thank Kyla and Raelyn and Eric for working so hard with me. We've been working on this for a while, so for working so hard with me to get together this panel and to get together this webinar. I want to thank again Dante and Shauntay for coming out. They have very busy schedules, y'all, and they still made it out to this webinar today, so I'm so very grateful. I want to thank the ASL interpreters, Juanita and Kimber, for agreeing to show up at this panel for us and agreeing to interpret for us. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I want to thank our captioner, Denise. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule as well to be with me in this event and to make this event as accessible as possible. And again, I want to thank you all for showing up, for being here, for being part of this conversation. And I want you to go out into the rest of your week, the rest of your month, the rest of your life, and spread this message. Don't let this just be something you came to, you listened a little bit, and then you left it there. Like, this is something that is supposed to inspire action, and I truly hope it does. So if any other panelists have a final thing to say, there's about 4 minutes left, but I just want to say thank you all so much.
I just want to say thank you, Kaelea. Thank you, Kyla. Thank you, everyone that participated. Really glad to meet my fellow panelists. This is the first time for meeting everyone, and hopefully we can stay connected because we are a community.
Yes. Awesome. Well, that's where we'll end it, everyone. Thank you so much again. We did record this panel, so this will be made available in our archive soon. And thank you, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.